Most people think healing is soft, calm, and beautiful. I'm here to tell you the truth. Healing is messy, it's brutal, it's raw. It breaks you down before it builds you up. It forces you to face the parts of yourself you've been hiding, the patterns you've been ignoring, and the pain you've been pretending doesn't exist. But here's the thing: in that chaos, in that struggle, lies the kind of power no one can take from you. If you're ready to see what real transformation looks like, then stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change everything. Healing isn't glamorous. The sooner we accept that, the faster we grow. We have been sold this idea that healing is a cute little self-care routine with candles, skincare, tea, and journaling while sitting on a perfectly arranged bed. But real healing feels more like breaking down in your car at 2 a.m. because you finally admitted the truth you avoided for years. It's sitting alone in silence and facing the thoughts you've tried to drown with distractions. It's confronting your patterns and realizing you've been the common denominator in your own cycles. Healing isn't aesthetic, it's accountability, and accountability stings. It forces you to look at the version of yourself that got you here. Not to judge it, but to own it, to understand it, and then to outgrow it. Most people say they want to heal, but what they actually want is relief. They want a shortcut, a hack, a mindset trick that erases the pain without going through the work it requires. But healing doesn't work like a motivational quote you read on Instagram and feel better for 5 minutes. Healing demands you sit with what you feel long enough to understand it instead of running from it the moment it becomes uncomfortable. It asks you to trade temporary comfort for long-term peace. The truth is, most people don't heal because healing means responsibility, and responsibility kills excuses. As long as people can blame someone else for their pain, they avoid change. But the moment you say, "This is my life, and I'm taking ownership of it," now you're in the arena. Now the work begins. Healing exposes the habits you built for survival, even when they no longer serve you. You start noticing how you shut down when someone cares because you were taught that love hurts. You notice how you overwork to feel valuable because your worth was once attached to performance. You see how you push away help because you believed needing others was weakness. Healing is uncomfortable because it reveals the truth about who you became in order to cope. And seeing that truth hurts far more than the initial wound, because the first pain wasn't your choice, but what you do with it now is. Healing shows you how you've been participating in your own suffering, and that realization is both painful and liberating. Painful because it forces you to change, liberating because now you finally can. There will be days in healing where you feel like you're going backwards. You'll ask yourself why old memories still trigger you when you thought you already let it go. But healing isn't linear, it's layered. You don't heal once. You heal the same wound from different levels of awareness as you grow. At first, you heal to survive. Later, you heal to understand. And eventually, you heal to transform. Just because pain resurfaces doesn't mean you failed. It means you're ready to face a deeper layer of the lesson. Repetition doesn't always mean regression. Sometimes it's mastery. You are not returning to the starting line. You are revisiting it with more strength, more wisdom, and more clarity than you had before. Your environment decides whether your healing accelerates or collapses. If you stay around people who benefit from the unhealed version of you, they will resist your growth. They liked you when you had no boundaries, when you tolerated disrespect, when you abandoned your needs to please them. Healing disrupts those dynamics because a healed version of you is harder to manipulate, harder to control, harder to guilt. So don't be surprised when healing costs you people. Some individuals were only compatible with your wounds. When you begin to choose better, they'll call you selfish, cold, or changed. They're right, you did change, that's the point. Not everyone will clap for your growth. Clap anyway. Healing asks you to replace coping mechanisms with courage. Coping numbs, healing confronts. Coping avoids, healing acknowledges. Coping blames, healing takes ownership. And ownership is the moment you stop waiting for an apology that may never come. You stop needing closure from the person who hurt you because you realize closure isn't something they give, it's something you decide. Healing is choosing peace over being right. It's choosing growth over ego. It's choosing to rewrite your story instead of rereading the painful chapters. It's accepting that what happened wasn't fair, but staying stuck in it isn't fair to your future either. Healing is not forgiving for their sake. It's forgiving for yours, so you don't keep drinking the poison they handed you. There is a stage in healing that feels lonely because you've outgrown the old version of yourself but haven't yet met the new one. This is the in-between, the gap where everything feels unfamiliar. You're not who you used to be, and that's uncomfortable. Your old habits call you back because they offer certainty, even if they hurt. Growth requires surrendering the familiar for the unknown, and the unknown feels scary. But discomfort is not a sign you're on the wrong path, it's evidence you're evolving. Healing asks you to trust the process long before the results appear. To walk without proof, to believe in the person you're becoming, even when you can't fully see them yet. Healing will make you stronger, not softer. People think healing turns you into a gentle, calm, Zen person. Sometimes yes, but often it first turns you into someone who finally sets boundaries, says no, and stops tolerating what once drained them. At first, this feels harsh. You'll feel guilty for choosing yourself when you spent years choosing others. You'll feel like the bad guy, simply because you stopped abandoning yourself. That discomfort is normal. It's the withdrawal of a self-betrayal addiction. Healing teaches you self-respect, and self-respect changes your entire life. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking to be accepted. You stop performing to be loved. You start living in alignment. Healing isn't about perfection. You don't graduate from it with a certificate saying, "I'm fully healed." Healing is a lifelong commitment to self-awareness. It's catching yourself slipping into old patterns and choosing differently this time. It's recognizing triggers and responding with intention, not autopilot. It's replacing reaction with reflection. In the beginning, healing feels like tearing your life apart, but eventually you realize you weren't destroying yourself, you were removing what was destroying you. Healing is subtracting everything that isn't truly you, so what remains is authentic. Raw, whole, not polished, but real. Healing convinces a lot of people to isolate because pain makes you pull back from the world. When you're hurting, you don't want to be seen in your most unfiltered form. You don't want people to witness the mess, the confusion, or the breakdown. But isolation might feel safe, yet it's the exact environment where your unhealthy patterns grow stronger. Alone, your mind becomes an echo chamber that repeats the same stories that broke you. Alone, you start believing every thought that tells you you're not enough. Alone, avoidance looks like peace, but it's really just silence around the wound. Healing doesn't happen in hiding. It requires exposure, honesty, and connection. Not with everyone, but with the right people. Healing is not a solo sport, and yet most people try to approach it like one. They think if they just work on themselves quietly, one day they'll magically emerge healed. But real healing requires accountability, and accountability requires witnesses. It demands people around you who are willing to hold up a mirror when you lie to yourself. The truth is, you can't outgrow patterns you refuse to acknowledge. You need someone who can see the blind spots you've normalized. Someone who isn't impressed by your excuses, your self-pity, or your avoidance tactics. Accountability isn't about someone calling you out to shame you. It's about someone calling you forward to grow you. We don't rise alone. We rise because someone cared enough to not let us stay small. There's this misconception that vulnerability is weakness, that showing your wounds makes you fragile. But vulnerability done with the right people is a strength move. It requires courage to say, "I'm not okay, and I need help seeing what I can't see myself." You don't heal when you protect your ego. You heal when you tell the truth. Pretending you're fine only prolongs the pain. Healing accelerates when you drop the performance and allow yourself to be seen in your raw, unedited reality. The goal is not to broadcast your pain to the world, that's oversharing. The goal is to share your truth with people who actually want to see you win. Not everyone qualifies for access to your vulnerability, but someone should have it. Some people say, "I don't trust anyone, so I heal alone," not realizing that lack of trust is the very wound that needs healing. Most emotional injuries originate in relationships, betrayal, abandonment, neglect, rejection, so it makes sense that the idea of being open again feels risky. But if pain came through connection, healing will also require connection. You can't fix relational wounds in isolation. You don't rewrite your story of people hurt me by avoiding people forever. You rewrite it by building new experiences with healthier people. It's not about trusting everyone. It's about learning to trust the right one. The right relationships don't reopen wounds, they help close them. To heal, you need truth. Tellers, not cheerleaders. People who clap for you feel good, but people who challenge you help you grow. Someone who loves you but isn't afraid to say, "You're repeating a pattern," or "You're avoiding the real issue," is priceless. Healing without accountability becomes self-delusion. You start justifying toxic habits with self-love quotes. You start labeling avoidance as protecting my peace. You start confusing comfort with growth. The right people won't let you lie to yourself in the name of healing. They will not watch you sabotage in silence. They will hand you the truth, even when it stings, because they care more about your evolution than your temporary comfort. Accountability isn't about letting someone control your healing journey. It's about allowing someone to support it. There's a difference between guidance and dependence. You don't hand someone the steering wheel of your healing, but you allow them to walk beside you so you don't get lost in your own mind. Accountability makes you consistent. It keeps you from quitting when healing gets hard, and it will. It stops you from romanticizing your trauma or building an identity around your wounds. When you heal alone, it's easy to slip into self-pity. But with accountability, you're reminded of your power, your progress, and your responsibility to keep going. It grounds you in truth. Healing with support requires discernment. You must choose wisely who gets to influence your growth. Not everyone around you is equipped to guide you. Some people want access to your struggle, not elevation for your life. Some prefer you wounded because your weakness benefits them. Some only listen to your pain so they have something to gossip about. Healing requires intentional circles, not familiar ones. Just because someone has known you for years doesn't mean they're qualified to walk with you in healing. Proximity does not equal alignment. Choose people who lead with empathy, maturity, honesty, and growth, because their energy shapes yours. You become what your environment allows. There's a version of healing that becomes performative when done alone. You start consuming healing content instead of healing your life. You read books, watch videos, take notes, but never implement. You become self-aware, but not self-improved. Accountability forces implementation. It turns knowledge into action. Someone who loves you will ask, "Okay, you understand the pattern now. What are you going to do differently?" Healing isn't measured by how well you can explain your trauma. It's measured by how differently you choose to live. Awareness without change is just intellectualizing pain. Accountability turns awareness into transformation. Healing with others allows you to practice emotional skills in real-time communication, boundaries, forgiveness, conflict resolution, vulnerability, empathy. You can't learn these skills in isolation. You need interactions to strengthen them. Growth requires friction. Healing requires exposure to situations that test the new version of you. That's how you know you're evolving, not because you read something inspiring, but because you respond differently than the old you would have. The people you heal with become mirrors, guides, and teammates. They show you how far you've come and how far you can go. Healing becomes a journey you're supported in, not a battle you fight alone. When you allow others into your healing process, you create space for collective growth. Your courage gives others permission to be honest about their wounds too. Healing becomes contagious. One person choosing self-awareness, accountability, and emotional maturity raises the standard for the entire circle. Instead of trauma bonding, you begin growth bonding. You surround yourself with people who don't just talk about healing, they live it. They do the uncomfortable work. They take responsibility. They apologize when needed. They ask for help. They prioritize growth over ego. And together, you build a foundation of relationships rooted in truth, safety, and evolution. One of the hardest truths about healing is realizing that the version of you who survived the pain cannot be the same version of you who thrives after it. We all build identities around our wounds without realizing it. You become the strong one, the quiet one, the overachiever, the one who doesn't need anyone, or the one who always keeps it together. These identities were formed to protect you, to give you a way to navigate environments that weren't safe for your authentic self. But at some point, the very personality traits that once kept you alive become the cage that stops you from expanding. Healing forces you to ask, who did I have to become to survive, and is that still who I want to be? That question is uncomfortable. Because healing isn't just about letting go of people. It's about letting go of the identity you built around pain, and shedding an identity feels like losing a part of yourself, even if that part was hurting you. Most people think healing is about distancing yourself from toxic relationships, and yes, that's part of it. But what's even harder is distancing yourself from the version of you that accepted that toxicity as normal. That version of you who silenced their needs to keep the peace, who tolerated breadcrumbs and called it love, who confused attention with affection, who believed that being chosen was more important than being respected. You don't just walk away from people, you walk away from your own patterns. You stop being the person who abandons themselves for connection. You stop being the person who shrinks so others feel comfortable. You stop being the person who sacrifices their worth for proximity. Healing isn't about blaming who you were. It's about outgrowing who you no longer need to be. The identity you built in survival mode was rooted in fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being seen, fear of being rejected, or fear of losing love. Survival. You was reactive, defensive, hyper, independent, guarded, or overly adaptable. That version of you did their job, they protected you when you didn't have better tools. But you're not meant to live your entire life in survival mode. At some point, you have to learn how to live, not just avoid pain. Healing asks you to stop operating from your past and start building from your future. To retire the coping mechanisms that once saved you. Growth asks, who would I be if I wasn't driven by fear anymore? And answering that means stepping into a version of you you've never met before. That's why it feels terrifying, because there's no blueprint for the healed you yet. Letting go of an identity is grieving, not just changing. You grieve the part of you that tried their best with what they had. You grieve the innocence lost, the trust broken, the years spent being someone you thought you had to be. Healing often triggers sadness not because you miss the pain, but because you're saying goodbye to the version of you who carried it for so long. It's like dropping the armor you wore your entire life and feeling naked without it. Vulnerability isn't comfortable if you've never practiced it, and evolving means letting go before you feel ready. People romanticize becoming your best self, but nobody talks about the emotional withdrawals of leaving behind your familiar identity. You don't just evolve, you unbecome first, and that unraveling feels like chaos before it feels like freedom. You will face resistance not just from others, but from within. The old version of you will try to pull you back because it feels safer. Your mind will say, "This is who I am," even when that identity is a trauma response, not your truth. The ego clings to old roles because change feels like death to the self. If you've always been the caretaker, who are you without someone to save? If you've always been the tough one, who are you when you allow softness? If you've always been the one with no needs, who are you when you start expressing them? The mind fears the unknown, even if the unknown is healthier. Healing requires identity disruption, and disruption feels like discomfort before clarity. But if your identity was built in pain, you must rebuild it in self-awareness. Your environment will also challenge your evolution. The moment you stop showing up as the version of you people are used to, they will react. Not everyone will celebrate your growth. Some will miss the version of you that never asked for more. Some will feel threatened when you stop accepting the bare minimum. Some will call you selfish, dramatic, or changed because you no longer serve their comfort. Understand this clearly. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will always label your self-respect as disrespect. And this is where many people revert back to their old identity because being the old version keeps the peace. But healing isn't about maintaining comfort. It's about breaking generational patterns and replacing them with healthier standards. If staying true to yourself costs you relationships, they were never aligned with your healed identity to begin with. Transformation requires intentional identity building. You don't just remove who you were, you decide who you're becoming. You choose new beliefs that align with your growth. You practice behaviors that reflect the healed version of you, even before you fully feel like them. You create habits that reinforce the identity you're stepping into. The healed you communicates instead of shutting down. The healed you sets boundaries without guilt. The healed you chooses alignment over attachment. The healed you values peace over chaos. Identity shifts don't happen through thinking, they happen through repetition. Every time you choose differently than your past self would have, you cast a vote for your future self. And eventually, those votes accumulate into a new identity. Healing requires radical honesty. You must be willing to admit, this isn't who I want to be anymore, and then commit to becoming someone better. It means admitting that some parts of you were rooted in survival, not authenticity. It means acknowledging where you contributed to your own pain through patterns you didn't know how to break. Healing isn't self-blame, it's self-awareness. And awareness is the first step to transformation. You don't heal by judging your old self, but by understanding them. They weren't wrong, they were wounded. They weren't weak, they were adapting. You don't evolve by hating who you were. You evolve by loving yourself enough to become who you were meant to be. Healing is not about going back to who you were before the pain. That version of you was vulnerable to the circumstances that hurt you, and returning to them is a recipe for repeated cycles. True healing is about becoming stronger, wiser, and more resilient. It's about evolving into a version of yourself who no longer tolerates what once caused you suffering. When you start to heal, you stop asking for permission from anyone else to value yourself. You stop justifying your boundaries. You stop shrinking to make people comfortable. Healing forces you to rewrite the rules of your life. You realize your past does not define your future. You begin living with intention, not reaction, and that shift is where real power lies. Healing requires courage, and courage demands action. You cannot simply wish away the pain or hope it resolves on its own. The process of healing asks you to stare at the wounds, acknowledge the scars, and make conscious choices to grow from them. It's not a passive experience, it's an active commitment to self-evolution. Every time you choose yourself over old habits, every time you refuse to settle for less than your worth, you build strength. Every moment you confront discomfort instead of fleeing it is a step forward. The healed self does not avoid the shadows, it moves through them. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's taking action despite it. And each step you take solidifies the foundation of a more powerful version of you. Healing transforms your mindset. Pain teaches lessons, but only if you're willing to internalize them. Every hurtful experience becomes a mirror, reflecting back the areas in your life that require change. You stop attributing your misfortunes to external forces alone. You begin to see the patterns you were unaware of, the behaviors that kept you trapped, and the choices that no longer serve you. Healing equips you with clarity that ignorance never could. You gain the ability to evaluate situations, people, and opportunities with discernment. You learn to differentiate between what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Your mind becomes your ally instead of a battlefield. And in this clarity lies the freedom to make empowered decisions consistently. Healing builds resilience, the kind of strength that is unshakable. Life will continue to test you, but the healed version of you responds differently. Where you once crumbled, you now stand firm. Where you once retreated, you now face challenges head on. Where you once allowed others' actions to define your worth, you now determine your own value. Resilience does not erase pain. It equips you to endure it without losing yourself. It's forged in the trials and the tears, in the moments when giving up feels easiest. Each setback becomes a lesson rather than a defeat. Every challenge transforms into an opportunity to reinforce your boundaries, your standards, and your self-respect. That resilience becomes a magnet for success, respect, and fulfillment. Healing improves relationships, but not by restoring old dynamics. Instead, it shifts the energy you bring to every connection. You stop tolerating toxicity, you stop overextending yourself, and you stop seeking validation outside of yourself. The healed self communicates with honesty, sets boundaries with confidence, and engages in relationships that reflect mutual respect. You attract people who support growth rather than drain it. You recognize when someone is incompatible with your evolved self and gracefully step away. Healing teaches you that relationships are meant to elevate, not diminish. By prioritizing your well-being, you set a standard for others. You stop negotiating for crumbs of affection and instead receive the fullness you deserve. And in doing so, you create a circle rooted in authenticity. Healing redefines success in your life. No longer is success measured by external validation or temporary approval. It becomes about inner alignment, peace, and fulfillment. You set goals that resonate with your values rather than chasing societal expectations. You understand that self-worth isn't contingent upon achievement alone. Healing allows you to pursue ambition with intention, not desperation. You take risks not to prove anything, but to grow into your potential. You learn to celebrate progress over perfection. You understand that failures are not judgments of your character, but lessons in resilience. And with this redefined success, life begins to feel expansive rather than constrained. Healing enhances emotional intelligence, a skill that changes everything. You start recognizing triggers without being controlled by them. You respond to conflict with intention rather than reaction. You understand your emotions, validate them, and allow them to guide growth instead of dictate behavior. Healing develops empathy, patience, and compassion not only for others but for yourself. You stop punishing yourself for mistakes and instead use them as springboards for improvement. Emotional intelligence empowers you to navigate life with clarity, connection, and confidence. It ensures that your relationships, decisions, and goals are informed by insight rather than impulse. And as you cultivate this intelligence, your interactions and opportunities deepen in quality. Healing demands consistency, the willingness to keep showing up for yourself day after day. There is no single moment of completion. Progress is incremental and sometimes imperceptible. Some days will feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But the commitment to continue to choose growth despite setbacks is what builds mastery over your life. Each day of self-awareness, boundary setting, and deliberate action compounds. Each moment you refuse to revert to old patterns reinforces the habits of your healed self. Persistence is not glamorous, but it is the engine of transformation. Over time, consistency turns effort into results, struggle into skill, and pain into power. Ultimately, healing is empowerment. It shifts your identity from victimhood to agency, from survival to mastery. It teaches you that your life is not defined by the pain you've endured, but by how you respond to it. Healing equips you with tools, awareness, and strength to shape your future intentionally. You no longer wait for permission to thrive, and you no longer settle for anything that diminishes you. You rise above what once held you down and embody a version of yourself that is aligned, resilient, and unstoppable. The journey is not pretty, it is not easy, but it is transformative, and the power you gain through healing is undeniable, permanent, and yours to wield.